I'm Spider-Woman, and nobody messes with me. Spider-Woman wasn't just another Saturday morning superhero cartoon. It was a rushed experiment in brand survival. Not a passion project, but a defensive maneuver. Behind the psychedelic villains and disco-era action lay production chaos, legal panic, and creative compromises that almost derailed the show before it ever aired. Here are 15 wild facts about Spider-Woman, including one secret so strange it changes how you see the entire series. Fact number 15, Spider-Woman exists because Marvel panicked. Spider-Woman does not come from creative inspiration. She comes from legal fear. In the late 1970s, Marvel executives worry another studio could trademark a female spider hero and dilute Spider-Man's value. The response is immediate and aggressive. They rush Spider-Woman into comics and television to lock down ownership. What audiences didn't know is that the animated series exists primarily as brand protection, not storytelling ambition. Production begins before the show's identity is fully defined. Scripts are written under pressure. Deadlines are brutal. It isn't about building a mythology. It's about planting a flag. Spider-Woman swings onto television not because the world demanded her, but because lawyers did, and that urgency shapes everything that follows. Fact number 14. Jessica Drew is softened by network fear. The Jessica Drew of the comics is sharper, darker, and emotionally complicated. The cartoon version is not. ABC standards and practices intervene early, demanding a safer heroine. Less anger, less menace, less ambiguity. What audiences didn't know is how deeply her personality is rewritten before animation begins. Dialogue is adjusted to sound warmer. Conflict is reduced. Emotional edges are rounded off. Executives worry a morally complex female lead might unsettle parents or advertisers. So Jessica becomes endlessly patient and reassuring. Not a survivor shaped by trauma, but a friendly guardian figure. It isn't character development, it's containment. Spider-Woman doesn't lose her edge on screen. She loses it quietly in pre-production meetings. Fact number 13. The animation team is pushed to the limit. Spider-Woman is produced during a period when television animation is stretched thin. Tight budgets, compressed schedules, multiple shows competing for the same artists. What audiences didn't know is how severe the production pressure becomes. Animators reuse backgrounds, recycle action loops, and rely on camera pans to hide limited motion. It isn't laziness, it's survival. Deadlines leave no room for refinement. Some episodes receive care, others barely hold together. Quality swings wildly because time does too. The studio is juggling too many projects with too few resources. Spider-Woman's uneven animation isn't a failure of talent. It's evidence of an industry operating at full strain with no margin for recovery. Fact number 12. The villains are visually defanged by censors. Spider-Woman's scripts describe genuinely disturbing threats. Mind control, parasitic creatures, identity erasure. But standards and practices step in repeatedly. What audiences didn't know is how often villain designs are altered after dialogue is recorded. Teeth shrink, eyes soften, shapes become abstract, voices remain intense while visuals retreat. The fear is backlash. Parents complaining, advertisers pulling support, so danger becomes suggestion instead of spectacle. The show walks a tightrope between menace and acceptability, not because creators lack imagination, but because fear has limits on Saturday morning television. The result is a strange tonal split where villains sound lethal but look surreal. Spider-Woman fights danger television refuses to fully show. Fact number 11. The show never decides what it wants to be. Spider-Woman constantly shifts tone because the network keeps changing its mind. One week science fiction, next week fantasy, then spy thriller, then comedy. What audiences didn't know is that these shifts are driven by ratings, feedback, not storytelling plans. Scripts are rewritten mid-season to chase trends. Darkness is added then removed. Humor is injected then abandoned. There is no long-term arc because executives are afraid to commit. Writers are forced to adjust. Rather than build, the show becomes a moving target Characters subtly change behavior, stakes fluctuate without warning. It isn't creative inconsistency, it's executive anxiety. Spider-Woman struggles to define herself because the people controlling her never stop second-guessing. Fact number 10. The show is constantly at risk of cancellation. By the time Spider-Woman airs its first episodes, the show is already under scrutiny. Ratings are watched closely. Merchandising numbers disappoint. Network confidence wavers. What audiences didn't know is how often cancellation discussions erupt behind closed doors. Executives question whether a female-led superhero series can hold young male viewers. Storylines are tweaked to appeal broader. Action is emphasized. Character depth is trimmed. Around this point, producers quietly push harder spectacle to justify survival. And if you're enjoying these hidden stories, go ahead and like and subscribe because this kind of animation history rarely gets told. Spider-Woman survives not because she thrives, but because she performs just well enough to avoid the axe. Fact number 9. Spider-Woman is isolated from the Marvel Universe. Unlike Spider-Man, Spider-Woman exists largely alone. No crossover heroes, no shared continuity. What audiences didn't know is that this isolation is intentional. Marvel and ABC fear brand confusion. Executives want Spider-Man protected from tonal risk. So Jessica Drew is placed in her own bubble. Her world feels disconnected because it is. Writers are discouraged from referencing other heroes. Potential crossovers are quietly dismissed. The result is a lonelier show with fewer narrative anchors. Spider-Woman fights threats without a larger universe behind her, not because creators want it that way, but because corporate strategy demands separation. Her isolation isn't thematic, it's structural, a wall built to keep one property safe from another. Fact number 8. The voice acting carries the show's emotional weight. With limited animation and softened visuals, the burden shifts to performance. What audiences didn't know is how much the voice cast compensates for production limits. Delivery adds intensity where movement cannot. Pauses replace missing expressions. Vocal strain sells danger that drawings cannot fully express. Recording sessions often finish before final animation exists, leaving actors to imagine scenes blindly. Yet performances remain committed. Emotion sneaks through tone rather than motion. Spider-Woman's confidence, fear, and resolve live in her voice more than her face. It isn't accidental, it's necessity. The show survives emotionally because its actors understand what the visuals cannot carry. Sound becomes the series' strongest storytelling weapon. Fact number 7. Episodes are rewritten to avoid too much power. Spider-Woman's abilities are impressive. Too impressive for network comfort. What audiences didn't know is how often scripts are altered to weaken her effectiveness. Victories are delayed, powers malfunction, allies intervene. Executives worry that an overly capable heroine might reduce tension or intimidate viewers. So limitations are introduced quietly. She hesitates, she stumbles, she escapes rather than dominates. It isn't about drama, it's about perception. The show walks a careful line between strength and restraint. Spider-Woman is powerful, but never allowed to feel unstoppable. Her struggles are engineered not to challenge her, but to reassure an audience still adjusting to the idea of a woman who wins on her own terms. Fact number 6. The series ends without resolution on purpose. Spider-Woman's final episodes do not build toward closure. There is no grand ending, no evolution. What audiences didn't know is that the show is never planned beyond its initial run. Renewal is uncertain from the start. Writers avoid long arcs because continuation is unlikely. Everything is designed to reset. Conflicts resolve quickly. Characters remain static. It isn't creative laziness, it's defensive storytelling. The show prepares for disappearance at any moment, and when cancellation comes, it arrives quietly. No announcement, no farewell. Spider-Woman simply stops spinning her web. The lack of resolution is not a mistake. It's a reflection of how expendable the series is considered at the time. Fact number 5. The show is quietly marketed as a test. Spider-Woman is never treated as a flagship series. What audiences didn't know is that internally the show is positioned as an experiment. Executives watch demographics more than stories. Can a female superhero hold attention? Can she sell toys? Can she anchor a time slot? Marketing is cautious, promotion is minimal, expectations are deliberately lowered. The show is allowed to exist but not expand. This mindset affects everything. Budgets remain tight, risks are discouraged, creative ambition stalls. Spider-Woman isn't pushed to succeed. She's pushed to prove viability, and when results come back mixed, the verdict is swift. Not failure, but not worth doubling down. The series becomes a data point rather than a legacy project. Fact number 4. Spider-Woman is designed to avoid sexualization. At a time when many animated heroines are stylized or exaggerated, Spider-Woman is deliberately restrained. What audiences didn't know is how intentional this choice is. Network oversight demands practical costumes, conservative framing, and minimal emphasis on body shape. Animators are instructed to avoid lingering shots. Action takes priority over appearance. This is not progressive ideology. It is defensive strategy. Executives fear backlash, accusations, and controversy, so Spider-Woman becomes functional rather than glamorous. The result is a heroine who feels grounded but visually understated. She is powerful without being provocative. That restraint helps the show survive broadcast standards, but also limits its cultural impact in an era driven by spectacle. Fact number 3, the series influences future female hero cartoons. Though short-lived, Spider-Woman quietly leaves a blueprint behind. What audiences didn't know is how often later animated heroines borrow its lessons. Independence without romance dependency, competence without comic relief framing, a lead who drives the plot rather than reacts to it. While the show lacks longevity, its structure echoes forward. Creators take note of what works and what doesn't. Strength balanced with approachability, action-driven narratives anchored by character. Spider-Woman doesn't dominate pop culture, but she informs it. Her DNA appears in later cartoons that push further with more support. The web she spins isn't visible immediately, but it stretches across decades of animated storytelling. Fact number 2, Spider-Woman disappears due to corporate discomfort. After cancellation, Spider-Woman doesn't rerun heavily. She isn't syndicated aggressively. What audiences didn't know is how quietly the character is shelved. Corporate priorities shift. Focus returns to safer male-led properties. Spider-Woman becomes awkward. Not failed, but unresolved. She exists in a gray zone of uncertainty. Revivals are discussed then abandoned. Her absence isn't due to lack of potential, it's due to discomfort. Executives are unsure how to position her. Too early for modern empowerment narratives. Too late for 70s experimentation, so she vanishes. Not erased, but ignored. Spider-Woman becomes a ghost in Marvel's animated history, waiting for the industry to catch up. Fact number 1. The show is ahead of its time and pays the price. Spider-Woman arrives before television is ready for her. What audiences didn't know is that timing matters more than talent. The series introduces a self-reliant female superhero without apology. No male lead, no romantic anchor, no gimmick. And that makes people uneasy. Not viewers necessarily, but executives. The show challenges norms quietly. It doesn't announce revolution. It simply exists, and that is enough to feel threatening. Spider-Woman isn't canceled for being bad. She is canceled for being early. Her ideas will later be celebrated, but in 1979, they are tolerated at best. The show becomes a casualty of cultural lag rather than creative failure. The bonus fact: Spider-Woman saves herself without ever saying it. The most overlooked truth about Spider-Woman is also the most radical. She does not need rescue. Across the series, she escapes captures, solves her own problems, and defeats threats without external salvation. What audiences didn't know is how unusual this is for its era. The show never frames this as a message. It simply normalizes it. That quiet confidence becomes its boldest statement. No speeches, no declarations, just action. And that is is why Spider-Woman endures, not as nostalgia bait, but as proof that progress sometimes slips through unnoticed. She doesn't ask permission. She doesn't wait for approval. She saves herself. And television quietly moves on, pretending it didn't just see something new.